Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this part two of the keynote speech about authenticity in museums. So we went through some definitions and a few theories last time, and now we're going to pick up again. And we ended with these questions that present a little bit of a dilemma, and we are now going into visitors' expectations and authenticity in action. So I would like to present a case study that deals with this issue and these questions. It is from a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Denmark, where I was hired as interpretation manager back in 2018. And back then I was in charge of the historical storytelling and narrative creation at the site. And here I face this challenge of visitor expectation versus historical accuracy or authenticity. And it was at a place called Kronborg Castle in Denmark, which is now part of the National Museum of Denmark in Copenhagen. I want to show you a photo here. It's based in a town called Elsinore, north of Copenhagen. I wonder if you might have been. You can Google it. Lovely, lovely place. And it's a beautiful old Renaissance castle. It's a fortification and a stronghold built in 1585 by the Danish King Frederick II. And it's been a UNESCO World Heritage Site since the year 2000. Now, Kronborg's location is actually important. If you are familiar with the geography of Denmark, here you go. Denmark is to the left there, and to the right you can see where Kronborg is located. It's just where we have the shortest distance between Denmark and Sweden. The southern part of Sweden there used to be Danish it was Danish for a long time. So all of this was Denmark once. The position is important though, because it meant that the Øresund Strait that could be controlled entirely from the fortification. There's only about 4 kilometers between Denmark and Sweden here. So the Danish kings imposed a tax on all cargo, all goods carried by ships and boats going through the Øresund Strait, the water between Denmark and Sweden. This was the only way if you wanted to go and trade in the Baltic Sea. It was far too dangerous to travel by land, especially if you were carrying lots of valuables. So the sea was definitely to be preferred. And you can see the distance to Sweden there. You can see Sweden in the distance. In the 1620s, a fire almost destroyed the entire castle. And even though most of the castle was reconstructed exactly as it was, a lot of the interior, furniture, and so on was destroyed. So this left the castle very empty inside. You also from this photo get an impression of the stronghold, the fortification there. There's some newer modern buildings around it there, now part of administration buildings and so on. But we kind of have today a very pretty, from the outside, old Renaissance castle, and the inside rather empty. This is from the Great Hall. You can see the very beautiful floor there, but all the furniture and interior inside today are either copies or they are furniture from a later historical period, like the Baroque period, for example. And we choose to use copies and reconstructions simply to fill the rooms a bit. Else it would look very empty and visitors wouldn't really have an idea about how the spaces were used or what they had once included if they were just empty. You can actually see a few of the original tapestries there on one of the photos. There are very few of them remaining, and a few of them are still at Kronborg Castle. But apart from that, not much is original now. We also tried to give an impression of the more intimate rooms, like the king's or the queen's chamber, with like copies of beds and models with clothes and so on. Apologies, these photos are a little dark. I'm not the best photographer in the world, but I hope you get the idea. Now, because we didn't have a lot of historical artifacts to work with, we tried to bring some history alive by creating dramatized tours. Where we made a historical character come alive, and this character would then give visitors a tour of their castle as it was in the Renaissance and tell them a bit about castle life and so on. And we did like ghost tours and so on as well. And you have here the mistress of the robes, a sort of housekeeper who of course knew everything that went on at the castle, and she would show visitors around and sort of let them in on castle life and what happened there. And it's a wonderful way of sort of creating a bit of life and making things come alive again. Now, Cornwall Castle was not just known as a Renaissance castle. In fact, most people actually come to visit because of a specific character. And you may have heard of it. You may have noticed that I said Cornwall was situated in a town called Elsinore, so you may have a qualified guess now of whom I am talking. Yep, Shakespeare's Hamlet. Cornwall is also known as Hamlet's Castle by a lot of visitors. In fact, a lot of foreign visitors everywhere from Asia, America, Southern Europe come to experience Hamlet's Castle. This tragic story of the Prince of Denmark that was written by Shakespeare sometime around 1600. And yeah, you have guessed it. Now we come to it, the dilemma. And I'm sorry I have to break this to you. It may be a bit of a shock. But Hamlet wasn't real, ladies and gentlemen. He was fictional. I know, spoiler alert. Sorry about that. He never lived. There's never been, surprisingly, a Prince Hamlet of Denmark who died tragically after 5 very long acts. And yet, we have people coming from all over the world to see Hamlet's castle. Most people, of course, know that he never lived, but you actually do, from time to time, encounter someone who asks where Hamlet used to sleep or eat or where he was killed and so on. So yeah, that happens. But in a way, this is a fantastic situation to be in because visitors come to you on their own. That's what you want. That's what any museum wants. But they don't come to see your place or hear about its history. They come to see a person who never lived. And that's where you have the dilemma. We have a bit of a challenge here. So let's just look at this challenge. We have a very lovely but empty Renaissance castle. And we have probably one of the most well-known fictional stories in the world. Everyone knows about Hamlet, some people in detail, but even if you've never read the story, you will have heard of it. For more than 400 years, this has been a popular story, and it's still told around the world today and put up in theaters and so on all the time. But we don't have any historical remains or objects from Hamlet because they never existed. And yet, this is what attracts people. So what do we do here? Well, let's first have a look at what we wanted to do. First of all, we wanted visitors to gain an interest in the Renaissance, in the castle, and of course in the castle's history. We wanted to give life to and fill the empty rooms and spaces in the castle. We also wanted to tell interesting, riveting stories that encouraged active participation and learning. And we wanted to exceed visitors' expectations. Of course, we all do that. We don't just want to live up to visitors' expectations. We want to exceed them, don't we? So the concept we came up with was a combination of our own expectations and the visitors' expectations. And I'll sort of let you be the judge of whether or not you think this was managed, and also where you sort of feel with yourself, when are you compromising authenticity, and what does compromising actually mean in this sense? What was created around this was a concept called Hamlet Live. This was an interactive, real-life, historic interpretation experience. I'll dive into details. What we used was real actors in the well-known roles from the Hamlet play. So Hamlet, Claudius the king, Gertrude the queen, Ophelia, Polonius the king's counselor, and so on. It was important that the actors had no problem breaking down what is known as the fourth wall, so the barrier between audiences and actors. They had to talk to visitors, interact with them, make them part of the story. They had to possess historical knowledge about the Renaissance and the castle to be believable and to be a believable part of the place. So what was Hamlet Live then? Well, the best way to describe it is that it was an interactive historic experience theatre and a live interpretation experience. It was based on Shakespeare's original script and language. So we used a theatre director and a script writer to rewrite the story and to make the story come alive in English for an interactive experience. So it was Shakespeare's characters coming alive at the castle in this kind of the same way we would do dramatized tours. It's not the full play, but it's scenes from the play in an interactive approach. We did actually set up a few actual scenes from the play, mostly because people like to see these. For example, the great duel scene at the end of the play, the rest is silence and those famous quotes. And we included, of course, to be or not to be, and those famous quotes. But most of the time, the storyline played out with scripted dialogues between actors that allowed for interaction for visitors' participation and input. And I'll show you some examples in a bit. So visitors had to participate to activate the story. And also it was quite important to us that the castle sets the scene. So as many rooms and spaces as possible were included. It was important that visitors got to see the castle and that the rooms sort of came alive. It had to be a tour of the place and of the historic period that it represented. So the time, of course, the Renaissance, the language, costumes, the setup, everything is the period of the Renaissance, and which was around the time that the castle was built, but also around the time the play was written. This challenged actors, certainly also us historians, interpreters, our conservators, in a completely new way, because we had history and historical sources that had to be told through fictional characters. We also wanted visitors to be participants. They had to be. This was not just a theatre production. This was an interactive approach. The actors had to improvise and interact and let visitors influence the storyline. And the castle had to be used in a completely new way. To give you an impression of this, I want to show you a little video. It's only about 30 seconds, but just to give you an impression of the place and how Hamlet Live worked. It's a trailer that we used from, I believe, one of the first seasons we did this. So let me just show you. The storyline did follow Shakespeare's play, so it didn't suddenly, have a happy ending or something, even though visitors could, of course, bring their own input. But we did have, like Ophelia going mad of love, the duel scene at the end, the king and his queen, and the king's counselor making plans, And of course, Yorick, the jester there, you can see in the photo, wonderful, playing with the kids. But it was also important that there were constant elements of interaction. So you could learn to shoot with bow and arrow from Laertes, Ophelia's brother, outside the castle. You could learn to dance a Renaissance dance. This photo at the bottom there is actually from some of the rehearsals we did with the actors, where we taught them how to walk and talk and dance and so on, as you did in the Renaissance. You could help Hamlet write love letters to Ophelia and so on. We obviously had a lot of discussion about this approach of mixing a fictional story with a historical place and with historical facts. Some of our discussions revolved around questions like these. Is it clear what is fictional and what is real? So will visitors get this, in other words? Of course, most did. Most are already familiar enough with the story of Hamlet to know this is a fictional world. Are you compromising authenticity and or working with existing platforms and expectations? When have you actually gone too far in your fictional approach versus your interpretation of historical facts? And what does compromising look like to you? When do you feel you are not being authentic anymore? These are quite interesting discussions to have. How do visitors perceive the experience? What do they take away? This was crucial because we wanted visitors to be able to learn more about history, the Renaissance in this case, and about the place through this experience. Can you successfully combine historical facts and fiction into an authentic and believable experience? Well, we felt we could in this case, yes, as long as we stayed true to both the historical side, historical facts, and also to the fictional story. We never tried to convince people that Hamlet lived, for example. We never said visitors could come and experience the play at the castle like you can in a theatre. But they could come and have a fun, engaging, educational experience where they would learn more about both the castle, the Renaissance, and Shakespeare's famous play. We wanted them to experience the castle, the site, and the Renaissance history through the play of Hamlet. And we knew we needed to be clear about what is history and what is fiction. We obviously went in and out of these questions a lot during the creation of this, and also discussed how we could address these from both a visitor point of view and from a museum professional point of view. And there will always be visitors who like an experience and visitors who don't, no matter what you do, no matter how authentic you try to be, or you engage in discussions around authenticity. But what turned out to be important was that we could have the discussion from a real life experience, not a theoretical discussion about what do you think authenticity is, but an actual experience. And we could include or address fiction and historical interpretation at the same time. We didn't always agree on the approaches that we took, but we always agreed on experimenting and trying. And then adapting accordingly. So a lot of changes were made along the way. And whenever I think you try something new, there has to be room for changes. There has to be room for mistakes to be made, for learning to take place. That is vital. So this was a huge learning experience for us as well. So there's no doubt that when you venture into methods of interpretation where you can get a closer look or a deeper get a closer look or a deeper experience using replicas and copies, you can indeed create a more profound connection between your visitors and the past. And there are some interesting examples where real and copies have merged or mixed. And I would like to show you a few examples in the final bit of the final part of this keynote speech on authenticity. So that is what we will be diving into in the next part of this. And we will also have a look at what does the future hold for authenticity in museums. So please tune in to the third and final bit later. Thank you so much.